Hey y'all, welcome back to today's episode. I'm super excited to be having this conversation with Avery Thatcher, and I cannot wait for you guys to listen in. She is a former ICU registered nurse with a decade of experience specializing in acute and chronic stress, its impact on the body, and how to prevent or even reverse the negative health effects of stress to avoid burnout and illness. She has created a flow state app. She's got group programs. She has been helping highly sensitive and high achievers recover their energy to optimize their habits so that they can elevate their impact in her business since 2015. This conversation is so good. We talk about the 4 types of burnout. We talk about the 4 types of energy. We talk about the 3 core fears. We just talk about her story and how she has gotten to where she is today. And I know that as a midlife mama, walking this menopause life, that so many of these different terms and so much of this conversation is going to resonate. So without further ado, let's jump in and find out some of this juicy information. Hey there, midlife mamas. Welcome to the Healthy Lifestyle Habits podcast, just for midlife mamas. Because let's be real, this midlife chapter is no joke. Our bodies are different, our minds are different, our hormones are different, and we're trying to figure out who we are after momming for all these years. This empty nest phase is an eye-opener for sure. What worked for us in our younger years is no longer serving us because we have so much life experience, and that's okay. This is a supportive space guiding you through those powerful 1% shifts to help you grow. As we know, health is not a one-size-fits-all, so each week you will learn about different topics, taking away tools and tips to implement. This season, we're going to tackle some of the biggest midlife questions that y'all have had about wellness in this chapter. We're going to be chatting about what is holding us back, where do we find joy, how do we prioritize ourselves through self-care. We're always going to be talking about ingredients, daily toxins, food swaps, breath work, and mindset, just to name a few. There's nothing better than feeling empowered to create the best next chapter. Am I right? After each episode, I hope you feel more equipped and at ease to take a step or two that will allow you to thrive. Whether you're a newbie or an OG listener, I am so glad that you're here. Let's embrace this new chapter and thrive together. Are you ready for all the possibilities? If you said yes, say, I am ready. Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. Like you heard in the intro, we're going to be having a chat today with Avery Thatcher, and I am beyond excited. As I learn about new people and I find their expertise, it just makes me so excited to share with you guys who I'm meeting, because they all have tools and tips and different wisdom from different perspectives that we can all, utilize in different ways to help us on our journeys. So welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me. I am very excited for this conversation. I'm a self-proclaimed super nerd, so I love talking about this stuff.
I love it. So I just want to start because a lot of people that are listening might not know who you are or kind of how you've gotten where you are. And although I know bits and pieces of your story, I would love to hear, your health story, where you came from and how you ended up, where you are today.
Absolutely. So I started off my career as a registered nurse, working in intensive care units across the country. And I noticed really early on that the number one reason why adults found themselves in ICUs were because of illnesses and diseases that could be linked to chronic stress. So I started working to get out of the reactive side of medicine, dove into the research, and then was teaching all of these things that the research says helps prevent health of side effects and things. So I was doing the meditation, I was teaching mindfulness, and got my yoga teacher certification and was going through all of these things. And then at the end of 2018, I experienced a major health shift. I went from working full-time, 12-hour shift work, more than full-time, let's be real, because I'm a high achiever. And all of a sudden I was sleeping 20 hours a day.
Yeah.
And it literally happened overnight. And it led to this sort of 18-month journey before I got a diagnosis of a chronic illness that will always cause a disability. And it's led to other chronic illnesses and different changes. And I really felt so lost
Mhm.
because I felt like I knew the life that I wanted, and that wasn't really in reach anymore. And so eventually I decided that I needed a fresh start. And so I chose to change my first name just to
Okay.
let the previous version of me go and
Okay.
redefine what life was going to look like from this moment forward. And so that's where I dove into the research and found out the missing pieces of the puzzle because I was doing everything quote unquote right to prevent this epic health experience. And that's where I really learned that burnout, which is what I believe I experienced in a very epic way, is actually more of an energy management issue than it is a stress management issue. And I'm really hoping we get to talk about that today.
Definitely. And it's so interesting because we are so when you were saying that, you changed your name to let go of that uh, different version of yourself, we come into this world and people pick a name for us and it's almost like we become an avatar of that particular person. And during that theta state, right, all these impressions and different things that people are saying to us over and over and over ultimately become parts and pieces of us. And not right, not wrong, just is. And, what we have to do as we age and we start to understand ourselves better is to realize that that suit that we put on at birth, because somebody gave us that name, because somebody told us we needed to do something a certain way, isn't necessarily who we actually are to the core. And so
Mhm.
when we do run up against illness, when we do run up against, different things that are happening in our lives, nobody teaches us how to dig into that, to see where we can unlayer some of that stuff. And that's what I find to be root causes a lot of the time. And, listening to your story about burnout, it is real. And what's real is, you can be doing all the right things. I had a different but similar experience where, I was very healthy. I've been on this journey for 20 plus years. I'm always shifting and growing and learning, but I was a caretaker about 6 years ago, more than that, to my mom for 4 years. And I did not have the right tools. I did not have the right practices. I had not grieved my dad's death. There was a lot of things that I'm now learning. Well, I learned obviously a couple of years ago, but that I could be as healthy as I wanted, but I hadn't dealt with the energy things. And so what
Mhm.
happened was I had mono as a child. And so Epstein-Barr flared up and I was napping in the middle of the day and I couldn't think. And I was just, and I finally just had to come to terms with I cannot be all things for everybody. And if I don't get control of my health, I'm going to be dead first. And so I was like, this is not working. But again, I think I needed that in order to understand that there was more to being healthy than just the lifestyle. And when I went to school to become an integrative health coach, one of the things in the philosophy that I like that I got from my schooling is that there's primary and secondary foods. And primary are the things on your plate, but secondary is everything off of your plate that feeds your soul. And I believe that
Mhm.
energy is part of that. And it's not talked about at all. And so that's why I'm super excited to be having this conversation with you today, because when you're looking at health and wellness and trying to, yes, those practices are important. It is important to have self-care practices, especially if you have zero. It's important to move your body. It's important to have those things, but let's relate that to the energy component, because we're all made of energy. So what are the four, I think you talk about four main energy, if you could kind of dive into those a little bit, or if you have anything to reply, say about all of that.
Yeah. No, no, I completely agree. And I think when we look at this conversation, absolutely there are root causes. And the high achieving part of us wants to just jump right in and be like, yeah, okay, let's fix it right at the bottom. Let's do this. Uh, but there's actually three different phases to that. Because if you are feeling completely energy drained, we have to start with recovering some of that energy first
Mm,
before you're able to hold space for yourself to dig into some of that deeper mental stuff. So when we talk about energy, it's both simple and not simple. because we either have a lot or we don't. But the thing is you're a complex being, and so am I, and so are you, the one listening right now. So we need to break it down into different components. So when we look at energy, there's actually four different kinds. Physical energy, which is what we typically define our energy levels as. We can either get up off the couch and do whatever we need to do, or we need a pep talk to like go pee.
Right.
So when we're low on energy, that's sort of where we're at there. We also have mental energy, and this is our ability to make good decisions, to think through complex problems. And often, especially in women's roles, when you come home at the end of the day and someone asks you, like, what's for dinner, you can be like, oh, I don't know, pizza. Because that's all you can think of,
All
because
right.
you've made so many decisions throughout the day. So when we're low on mental energy, it's really hard to make choices that are really going to benefit us in the long run and also solve more of those complex problems. The next kind is emotional energy. And this is where we either have lots of patience, we have compassion, we're able to see the other person's perspective, or we're irritable. We say something, it comes out of our mouth, and we want to eat that right back because we're just like,
Mhm.
oh, where'd that come from? It's like a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde kind of moment. So we really want to be aware of that energy as well, because it definitely plays into both the mental and the physical. And then
Mm.
the final kind is fulfillment energy. And this is where what we're doing connects us to a purpose. And so it's like we have meaning behind the actions that we take. And so this doesn't mean that you have to do, because I know high achievers immediately are thinking like, oh yeah, I should volunteer. I should go and do this.
Mm.
It's like, okay, so how do you have meaning in your life just as it is? And
Yeah.
really coming back to those things and making sure that that is really the actions you take are in alignment with that. And when we look at that perspective, it's a lot different than the capitalist view that we live in, because capitalism sees success as the things you accomplish.
Hmm.
Whereas if we look more from a Vedic perspective, it's actually success is how aligned you are living in your purpose.
Purpose.
So,
Absolutely.
yeah, we're looking at kind of from all those four perspectives. So, of course, all of those exist in their own little silos, but they all influence each other and all are drained in different ways. So, for example, doing an interview like this just lights me up. It absolutely just fills up that fulfillment energy bucket, but it does drain physical, mental, and emotional energy. And so, keeping that into account, I make sure that I plan my day around those kinds of things. So that way I'm not just draining all of the buckets all the time. And then I've got another interview later and I've got to like try and find energy from somewhere. It's all about looking ahead and finding those balances.
Yeah. And I find from a personal perspective, when the thing that you're doing is your soul's purpose, right? If it is something that truly, you don't have to really dig for as much energy. I find when it's things that are out of alignment, that are just the things that, you do maybe because you have to, right? Or maybe because you think you're supposed to. That's a big one to dig into. But, I think that sometimes it is harder to find that energy at times when it isn't as fulfilling. And I also think when you are a more highly sensitive person, and you feel other people's energy, and you can feel tension in the room, you feel different things that some people do not even understand. Your energy level, we call it a battery in our house, but your battery goes down quicker, and you have to understand that we as humans, some of us need recharging time. Other people don't, or they don't know that they do. And so they've just lived a certain way. And I can only speak from my perspective and people I've worked with. There's some and some, right? I mean, because that's what makes the world go round. But I think when we get wrapped up in what society tells us, which a lot of times is untrue, for all beings, is we need to, again, check in with ourselves and how do those things make us feel. And yes, you know what? We have to do laundry, right? As a human being, unless you're going to wear dirty clothes, you've got to do some laundry. But if it's not your favorite thing, when you start to learn what things do give you energy, you can kind of balance, you can learn to more balance things rather than just doing all draining things in a day or all things that stimulate in a day, and it's like trying to create. And I also, when you were talking about the energies, to me, again, it goes back to a holistic being. It goes back to a whole person perspective and not all this departmentalizing that we constantly see out in the mainstream. Um,
Mhm.
But again, in order to gain energy back, right? Like let's just say we were doing something and it started to deplete us. That's where I feel, and you can correct me and I want to talk about it, is that's where the tools come in. That's where the practices come in. That's where, I mean, if it's something that is going to drain you, what can you do? Is it doing a quiet meditation for 5 minutes? Is it journaling your feelings out? Is what tools can you put into place to balance out the energy so that you stay at a more balanced, even keel? Of course, we're going to always fluctuate up and down, but the more we can expand the tolerance window and stop bouncing around, the better, we can show up on a daily basis and not have as much, I guess, suffering from the depletion.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so there's a couple of things that you talked about that I just want to touch on. I think it's also important to recognize that a lot of the activities that do fill up our fulfillment energy are going to drain everything else.
Mm-hmm.
It does feel like a lot of work sometimes, and it depends on the day, and it depends on what you woke up with. It also depends on the activity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's it's important to realize that not everything that is in alignment with that purpose is going to feel great. Some
Sure.
of it is going to suck, and
That's
that's
right.
okay. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. And then the next piece, I think it's it's really a delicate balance because we want to make sure that we're not using self-care as transactional. I
Mm-hmm.
do this so then I can do that.
Correct.
And I think when we get into thinking of it, and I know I explain it as batteries, but we think of, okay, so I've got this, so that means I need to do this so that I can charge up this battery so that I can be ready for that. This is where we start to see self-care as a tool rather than actually as compassionate care. So I
Okay.
think the high achiever brain can easily go to, oh, I do this, I get that. I like we need to also look at it from that perspective as well, because it's very easy, depending on uh, which belief systems you were taught as you grew up. And some of
True.
those deep-rooted core beliefs, it can be very easy for self-care to become transactional.
Yeah, I like that. And it's a really good point because again, that's how most of us grew up, is very transactional, because it's like you study for a test, you get the grade. You get the grade, you get the accolade. You're on this team, you win the champion, you work really so everything, I think, always has a transaction. Now, some people do thrive off of reward, but it's, again, the flip of the mind, I think, is what is most important, especially in this midlife chapter. It's like flipping and reframing, like what we were taught or once what was, and now what makes sense for us now where we are. And I think it's a hard thing to say this makes sense. Well, we can't for everybody, because everybody's so different and bio-individual, and your upbringing was very different than mine, and your health status is very different than mine, and your relationships and all of the parts and pieces, everybody's so bio-individual, but yet we live in this society that says it's a one size fits all, which it's not. And so I think,
Absolutely.
again, we have to give ourselves grace, especially in this midlife chapter where, we're going into perimenopause, menopause, postmenopausal. We are, our kids are flying the nest. Like, so many changes are happening. And during that time, we start to question a lot, and when we have a depletion of hormones, it's real. There's real physical things that come along with that has not really been talked about, and to my knowledge, a lot. And how long has that been around? Forever, right? So I'm
Mhm.
trying to bring language to that for people and myself, because to be quite honest, it's in every health situation I've ever been in, it's always come back to me reframing it for myself. And so I'm trying to teach people how to do that and be an advocate for themselves, because you can't rely on one person to know everything about you, in particular. And no fault to the doctor, they can't know your entire life.
Absolutely. And I love this conversation because I think in so many areas of life, we've lost the ability to discuss nuance.
Yeah.
And I think that that is such an important part of this conversation. And the other part is to start stepping back from all of the waves and stories and
Yes.
experiences and things, and stepping back and starting to question it, just to look at it
Mhm.
objectively, because some of those things are absolutely true. and
Sure.
true for us, and we still want to follow those things. But there's a lot of it that's not serving us anymore. And
Mhm.
so it's not necessarily that it's good or bad. It's just some of those things can serve or sabotage us. So I've talked a lot about high achievers, and me as a high achiever, uh, it serves me and sabotages me. So I need
Mhm.
to look at where do I have these kinds of beliefs on the spectrum. So I think, like you were saying, in this midlife where so much is going through change and shift, and it's like your identity is almost
It is.
getting questioned, right? Like you're not like,
Correct.
who am I now
Mhm.
that I don't have dependent children? Who am I now that my job responsibilities are shifting, or whatever it is that's changing for you at this point in your life? And so
Mhm.
really just looking back at that identity piece and stepping back into objectivity to see it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think again that is probably one of the greatest gifts that you can give yourself is that space to detach from the swirling thoughts, to detach from and when I say detach, it is to zoom back. It is to pull back your lens. And again, we haven't been taught to question those things. How does that feel for me? Like just because somebody told me that's what I should be doing, what is the feeling I get when I'm doing that thing? And
Mhm.
then start to analyze that. Like when I do that, I'm getting, very tight stomach. I'm getting a very tight chest. Okay. Well, why? So what can we do in place of that? And then how does that feel different? And so I think it's a lot of just when you say nuance, it's a lot of that tiny little, and I call them 1% shifts, but you have to start to shift in little ways to recognize that your body will shift too. I think our
Absolutely.
body holds a lot of the wisdom and the answers, and we just have stuff, just ignored all of that because of a lot of the outside influences. So, again, getting back in touch with who we are, even if you don't know who you are, you have an internal being, and it's that
Yeah.
be, do, relate type of thing. It's like we're always doing. We never are just being. And when you are being, it can be scary at first because a lot of things will start to surface that when you're doing and you're just on the go all the time, that will not come up because it's not safe. But once you start being and you slow down, and I think again in this midlife world that we're walking into and that we're some of us are living in, you get a moment to pause almost, and it's frightening for some because they've never done it. They don't know what to do with it. And so again, it's just being okay with feeling some of the feelings that might arise or some of the images or some of the past experiences. But then what do you do with them? And I think that's where coaches a lot are good because they can help to kind of delayer some of that, help you to delayer it, not us do it for you. And I think, again, that's the difference between like a coach and a doctor, a coach and a nurse. They usually give prescriptions, they give this, like follow this orders. And I think coaches come more at it like, where are you right now? Like, what step can we take where you like meet people where they're at? And I don't think that doctors do that quite yet. I think it's going to shift. I hope.
Mhm.
That's a desire, and then this is one reason I do this podcast is because the more information that we can learn from each other that have experienced it, the more we can try on things and see what actually works for us so that we can grow personally and not with a pill or with a, procedure or with a very rigid, restrictive kind of idea.
I agree. And I think like we've all heard about those 1% shifts.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's a really common thing that people talk about, but I think like logically we know that's a good plan. But in our emotional body and our heart, we're just like, why is it taking so long? Like,
Mm-hmm. But you can't
oh,
really do those shifts if you're having emotional drainage, right? It's hard to
yeah.
do things when you're not emotionally intact, when you aren't, in a place where your mind, yes, you can have all the logic in the world, but if you can't find the energy to apply it, you know, or to have a light bulb turned on to see that you're already applying it in some way, shape, or form, it's really hard to get out of the rut, basically.
Yeah, and so this is where I saw a quote,
Mhm.
like it was just sort of information a while
Yeah.
ago, and it's been really powerful to shift that because I think if you're seeing 1% shift of like, oh, that's so tiny and
Mhm.
whatnot, those big airplanes, the big jetliners, they are constantly being pushed off course with turbulence, with the turn of the earth, with the different wobble of the axis, and all of the different things. And so those jetliners always do little tiny course corrections as
Mhm.
they're going constantly as they're working towards that final destination. And so when we're looking at the changes that we're making, rather than trying for the overhaul or trying to go for the 1% change and get frustrated, we're still looking at forward motion when we look at course corrections. And
Mhm.
so sometimes just changing the words of what we call it can be all that we need to start to move with that, even if we're emotionally drained, because then now we're just redefining it, and it
Mhm.
can just be such a powerful shift.
Yeah. And again, I think that's such a personal, internal thing, depending on what resonates with you, right?
Mhm.
I do, most of the women that I work with, they just have, I don't, they probably are overachievers, but they just have that all or nothing mentality of, if I'm not going to be able to do it all, I'm not going to do it at all. And
Mhm.
so that's where we start to reframe immediately, because nobody runs a marathon overnight. You have to train, you have to do the small little things to build up the stamina, to build up the program to be able to be able to run 26 miles, right? I mean, but if you want to go out and just do a really quick sprint, most people can, I'm not going to say it's a fast time, but most people can go out and sprint to their mailbox. But that's a totally different training practice, right? Than getting ready for something a little bit bigger. And I think when we are overhauling our life, when we're coming into this chapter where things are shifting, it is sort of an overhaul, and an overhaul takes time, and it takes a lot of unlayering, you know, all of the different hats we've been wearing all of our lives, right? And then discovering, when you lift that hat off, who's actually under there.
Mhm.
And I love the energy point, because I feel like, again, I am a believer of tools and tips and things, because people have to take a step that feels good for them, that's going to help them to find success. But you also have to be aware of the energy, the batteries, whatever you want to call it, those. And I like how you define them into 4 spaces, because again, it really allows you to understand yourself better. And I think ultimately, once we start to do that, things start to shift. I know for myself, like, as I worked through lots of different things, trying things on, like, my morning quiet time is something that I need in order to step out in my best version on a daily basis. If I don't get it every day, do I notice a difference? I kind of do. I'm more snappy. I'm not as focused. I haven't, done my devotional. Like, there's certain things I know, and then I can see during the day how that is affecting. And I think, again, until I had the experience of doing it and then not doing it, and then seeing how I was different, and I take that, that was an emotional thing for me. My emotions were not in check. They were like not allowing me to react the way I guess I would normally react when I do have the quiet time.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so I think, it kind of comes back to, you talked a little bit earlier about the window of tolerance.
Mhm.
And so that's a phrase or a concept coined by Dr. Dan Siegel, who's
Mhm.
like a lead researcher in the trauma space. And I think when we start to think of, oh, yeah, I need this morning routine that needs to have all of these calming things in it, depending on where your window is at, it can actually be quite counterproductive. And
Yes,
this is where,
correct.
when we start getting into like meditation, especially if we do have a traumatized nervous system,
Mhm.
and I'm actually talking about an injury to the nervous system, not just distressing experiences. Those are still very valid and still require a lot of support and help. But when you have a traumatized nervous system that has the injury, when we start to slow down, we have the like, oh, things are getting too much at the top of our window, but we also have things are too quiet at the bottom of our window. And so when we start to calm that down, we can actually harm ourselves in some way. And so I remember a couple of years ago when I was really struggling with the health shift that I had gone through, meditation was always my safe space. And I sat down on my meditation cushion and closed my eyes, took a couple of deep breaths, and then all of a sudden I was outside walking my dog about 20 minutes away from the house. No recollection of how I got there. I was wearing shoes, but no remembrance of anything. And so that dissociation that I had was so strong because of the traumatized nervous system and that injury. And so when we're looking at how do we structure our morning, how do we structure these things to help recharge us, we have to be very aware of what we're trying to do. And so this is where I think about routines and like maybe your morning routine, not necessarily as a checklist of items of things that you need to do, but it's more of how do I want to feel when I'm done? And that sounds
Absolutely.
very much like how you do it, Robin, is you think of like, how do I need to feel emotionally balanced and grounded? So instead of thinking
Absolutely.
like, I need this miracle morning to start at 5 a.m. to get through all of these things, every day is going to be a little bit different. And then also really playing in with where your nervous system is at. Because I think it's also very important as we're talking about all of these tools to
Mhm.
make sure that you are trying things with that awareness or working with someone that understands the injured nervous system.
Correct. And again, I think it's very bio-individual. So depending on where your journey is at, but I want to say no matter where your journey is at, just having a routine with some checks is not the point or the purpose of these things. And I say this all the time, any goal you set, any practice you're going to try, it is ultimately what are you going to be wanting to feel at the end? Because if you can understand or have enough awareness of what you want to feel like, you will be able to know if that practice is right for you at the time. And it will pivot and shift just like that meditation worked for you at one time, but then it didn't work for you because your body will tell you what it can handle.
Mhm.
Our body is super wise and it's only going to allow you to do things that are either going to propel you forward or keep you safe. And so
Mhm.
that is, again, it's all about questioning and understanding what you want to feel like. Lots of people, when they think of health and wellness, it's immediately, I want to lose X amount of weight. It's always an outer exterior, I want to have a 6-pack ab. I want muscle. I want to be firm. All of these things, but your goal can be whatever, but what is it that you're going to feel like when you get there? And
Mhm.
depending on the answer, so I'll just make something up, but maybe it's more confidence, maybe it's feeling better in their own skin, maybe. And so then my reply is that's an amazing goal to feel that way. But why are we going to wait until you have this result in order to feel that? Let's make some kind of an effort every day to have that feeling every day. So what can we do today that's going to create confidence for you? Is it getting dressed a certain way? Okay. Where you're at right now, if you need to, buy some different clothes for a little bit to make you feel that confidence, that's what you need to do. And be where you're with yourself, where you're at currently to create those feelings. And the byproduct of starting to feel good, because we all deserve to feel good, right? Is the external weight loss or is, the fact that maybe going to the gym makes you feel energized and that's a feeling you want. That will just ultimately fall into the thing you think you want, even though
Mhm.
that's just an external being. You need to be working on the internal feeling part of it all.
Mhm. Yes,
So
agreed.
yeah, I love that. And I love that your journey kind of, I love people's journeys. And I think they're another reason why I'm doing this podcast is everybody's story is important. Everybody's journey is very important. And what's most important is that we feel safe enough to share it because it will help somebody else. And so if you're part of somebody else's change, of somebody else's aha moment, if we all did that, if we were all vulnerable to share things and learn from each other, I mean, we would just be a completely different, society, world. I mean, rather than
Mhm.
dragging each other down and, oh, look what she's doing. I mean, there's such a was that the comparison trap or whatever?
Yeah.
It's about feeling good in your own skin and then sharing maybe your journey or your story as to how you are where you are, just to give somebody else, number one, they feel seen, they feel heard because they could have your same experience or a similar experience.
Yeah.
And then they see hope, right? They see something different. And then that gives them the momentum to keep stepping forward. So
Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing your story because your first job, right, your ICU nurse was a very important one and you helped a lot of people. But in the process, you were not helping right? You didn't help yourself. And so that is where, and so I want to talk about burnout a little bit because I do think that's a real thing. And I think it's something that I want to get your perspective on.
Yeah, sure. So, like we talked about earlier, burnout is more of an energy management issue than a stress management issue. And so, one of my favorite ways to describe this, and I know that you've already heard this description, but is just imagine that you're sitting in a boat. And then imagine that that boat is full of holes and it's slowly taking on water, but it's okay because you have a bucket and you have a life jacket. And so as that boat slowly fills up with water, you can start to bail yourself out with your bucket. But then the water starts to go in a little bit faster, and then you start to get a little bit more tired, and you can't scoop out quite as much, and you can't scoop it out as fast. And then your boat sinks, and your life jacket catches you. So, in this scenario, burnout is our life jacket. It's our body's fail-safe mechanism. It prevents failure, essentially, body failure. And so then in the scenario also, our bucket are those stress management tools. And so we can do more to make our bucket bigger. We can do them more often to make us bail it out faster, but we have to have the energy to keep up with that. And one of the things that I think a lot of us, and I know that we've been talking about it a lot here, is we start to dig into some of those root causes. What's actually causing my burnout? Those are holes in your boat. And so some of those holes we can't do anything about, like the dumpster fire of a world we're living in right now. Those are very stressful things, especially for highly sensitive people. It hurts your heart to see this much suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is something which we can't change, but there are things that we can. And so looking at the holes in the boat that we can plug or slow the flow, or just understand that we have to make sure that we deal with that, process some of those experiences, really helps us really address burnout in a very holistic way. And now when we look at burnout, just like there's four kinds of energy, there can be four kinds of burnout. So you can have physical burnout where it's really difficult to get up in the morning, sleep never seems to be enough. Then there's the emotional burnout where you just feel like you're not yourself anymore. You just don't have that connection. You feel numb. The mental burnout is when like you are super forgetful. I often talk about how my mind feels like it's Swiss cheese and there's just holes everything kind of falls out of. So that's often the experience there. And then fulfillment burnout is such an interesting one because so one of the people which I chatted with a while ago, he was a concert pianist. He was traveling around the world. He was playing Carnegie Hall and all of the places and traveling. And on paper, his life was amazing. He was sharing this beautiful gift with so many people, but he was miserable.
Mm-hmm.
It did not get that fulfillment energy for him. And so the fulfillment burnout was such an important thing for him to notice and to name because he had a lot of energy physically, mentally, and emotionally. It was just that he felt that his life lacked purpose. So knowing that we can be burnt out in one of these, all of these, some combination of these is also really helpful in identifying it in the first place because awareness is always the first
I
step,
was
and I'm
just
sure you
and
talk
just
about that a lot.
right. And I
So
was
we have to
literally
know what we're
like, I'm
dealing
like,
with.
awareness, awareness, awareness.
Exactly. So really understanding the nuance and the different phases of burnout is so, so important.
Yeah. And I really feel like for a lot of empty nest moms who are coming into this chapter who maybe even have had a career the whole time, there's just a lot of things that surface. And I think burnout is part of it. And what I also feel is that when you go into the changes of menopause, something shifts. For me, it was 50. I don't, if I'm sure for other people, it's different ages where I just felt like I had an awakening to the fact that I could slow down. What was I doing? Why did I need to feel like I needed to go at 100 miles an hour? Maybe one time in momming, in momhood, when you have multiple kids doing multiple things, and you kind of get on that speed train, and you're doing, and you're not ever being, like you said, you can keep doing it just like he was the pianist and he was amazing, but you forget that you can also burn out in that area, because you're not fulfilling your other buckets sometimes, and not having more of a balance. And so I feel like when you step into this new phase in this midlife chapter, recognizing becoming aware of maybe some of the areas of energy in which are not balanced and or that you're having burnout in. It's all just really about being aware to awaken what is and then understanding different things in order to move forward. And it's possible. That's what I want to tell everybody listening. If you feel like you've hit a bunch of dead ends, if you feel like, you haven't quite just gotten where you want to be, if you feel like you just feel like you keep running into dead ends. I also, you were talking about the course corrections. And I just, again, speaking it just in a different language, different terms, we're always going to be challenged. We're always going to have dips. But I believe that God creates those dips for us because it's just another opportunity to be aware of something different, to then grow in a different way, to become a better version of who he has created you to be, and I just think having that mindset of not looking at it as I'm failing, because when you're a high achiever, I think that's a danger zone of, if I'm not doing, then I must be failing, and getting rid of that mindset and more flipping it to, it's okay just to be for a minute or two and not always having to be achieving to prove myself to anybody, because your suit of whoever you are really is just kind of I always say a minion, but I know it's not, like an avatar, something like that. It's not really internally to your core what not validates you, but just who you are, really.
Mhm.
Can't think of the word I was trying to think of. Because I have Swiss cheese for a brain sometimes.
That's it. Exactly. Sometimes those words are just like, pew, and then good luck. And that's just how life is.
That
And
is.
so,
And
yeah, I agree. Like, I think high achievers, um, a lot of the doing is driven by a kind of fear.
Mhm.
And so this is where the three core fears, again, with awareness, is really important to recognize which core fear is holding me back here. So the three core fears are the fear of the outcome, which is what we often think of. It's like,
Mhm.
what if it's not perfect? Or what if it is and everything changes? And then also the fear of the process, which is
Mhm.
absolutely something which I think a lot of high achievers are like, oh, no, I'm not scared of hard work. When I went to change my name, it was absolutely fear of the process. I had to tell my family, the people that named me, that I was changing my name. I had to tell everybody my entire business was around a completely different name. I had to switch all of that. So there was a lot of the process that I was actually scared of. And again, with awareness, then you're able to look at it and be like, okay, let's pick that up and let's keep going. And then the
Mhm.
last one is the fear of loss,
Mhm.
because often we're worried that we're going to lose something, lose someone, lose people are going to lose respect in us
Mhm.
if we say yes or if we say no. And so I think
Mhm.
when we're looking at why am I always doing, try and figure out which core fear is driving that. Because that's going to then uncover another layer, which you can then look at and
Mhm.
see, like, okay, so where did that belief start? And this is
Mhm.
where, with what Robin does, is she helps you dig into those spaces. So learning how to really figure out where's the origin story of where this
Mhm.
fear is coming from is
Yeah, I
such an
love that.
important piece. And that's what we definitely do as well on our
Yeah,
side. But yeah,
I love
so
that.
important.
So you created an app, and you have some course programs. I want you to just kind of tell people what you do and how you work with people so that if this is something that's sparking them of interest to them, of course, all of this will be in the show notes, so you don't have to frantically write anything, but also follow, Avery, because her content is just, it's valuable and it's good, and it will give you little drips of pieces of things just to start the process, in your mind.
There you go. Little 1% changes, right?
That's right.
Course correction.
That's
That's it.
right.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I have an app that we created. It's called Creating Calm. Because again, in this dumpster fire of a world that we live in, calm isn't going to find us. We have to
Mm-mm.
create it. But
Mm.
I also understand that everybody's really busy. You're busy doing. So where
That's
is this
right.
all going to fit in? So in this app, we have 15-minute yoga classes, 30-second to 60-second guided meditations, short little exercises you can do, somatic release exercises, mindfulness prompts, things that really just help you find little moments of calm in the pockets of the day. You
Mm-hmm.
know, the 30 seconds before you go into a grocery store, such a powerful time to do something little for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And again, in this app, we have something called the Life Balance Program. Every week, we talk about another course correction, another 1% shift that you can do to make just a tiny little habit change that's going to have a huge impact. So that's all in the Creating Calm app, and you can find all of that information there on my website, which is becomingavery.com. And then I also have 3 group programs. And so they all kind of step up those 3 phases that we talked about at the beginning of our conversation. Because if you want to do some of these changes, you have to have the energy to do it first. So
Correct.
this is where the first step is the Recover program, where we help you recover some of your energy and recharge a little bit so that you have the motivation and drive to do some of the deeper work. The next level, second program, is called Optimize. And this is where we're optimizing your energy. We're looking at how can we make your life more streamlined? How can we make things easier, more in flow? How can we make sure that your batteries are full more of the time? Or how do you deal with that when they're not? And then the last phase is the Elevate phase. And this is where we're looking at all of those root causes, all of the belief systems, the patterns, the habits, the parts of us that we need to reevaluate and bring back into the serving side of the serving versus sabotaging scale. So those are the main ways that I work with people. And yeah, the Creating Calm app does have a free week trial. So if anybody's interested, you can go test it out and see if we're the good fit for you.
That's great. And you also have a podcast.
I do. Yes, I do. So I have 2 because I'm a high achiever, and here we are. But the first one is called The Truth About Burnout. And so this one we dig into a little bit more about different people's experience with burnout, and then also some of the root causes that lead to that, especially in the professional corporate kind of space. And then my podcast is called Inner Stillness, Outer Chaos. And this is where I share all about the ups and downs and the messy middle of my life and how I navigated as a highly sensitive high achiever with a disability and OCD, anxiety, all of the things, and show you how to find calm and create your own calm in, again, this wild world that we live in.
Yeah. And I love what you just said. It's the create. Like we have to give ourselves permission to be the creator of that calm and not allow others and situational and external things to drive whether we are able to have calm and stillness or not. That is a choice. You know, we don't have choices in everything, like you said. Like some of the things in our world, they are what they are, and we can kick and scream and shout all we want. It's not up to us to make that particular thing change or change the process of it. So it's about controlling what we do have control over, which is ourselves. And I think, again, we've given our power away at so many different levels growing up and, you know, throughout that. That's something that in this chapter, I would, you know, it's one of my desires for all women to start to take back, because the more we can take that power back of understanding that we are the ones that can control some of those things for ourselves, not for anybody else, but for ourselves. And that's boundaries. A lot of that comes down to boundaries and having really understanding what boundaries are for. Because I think years ago, whatever, decades ago, you know, boundaries were putting things in place to keep people out, right? Boundaries of, but really it's a boundary for yourself. What are you willing to accept? What are the boundaries that keep you safe? Like I know in my home, I have to have a certain culture, climate, environment in order for me to feel my best. And I now know that I cannot have chaos and negativity and certain type behaviors going on here because it triggers me. And so knowing that about myself, those are my boundaries that, you know, can I control that outside? No, not, I mean, not everywhere I go, am I going to be able to not run into a human that has some of those things, but in my home, I can talk about those things not being of service to any of us. But I can also, when I'm out, if it feels that way, I do have control to get up and not be there. So again, it's about giving yourself permission to live within your own boundaries you've created to preserve your energy, to keep you functioning, again, you know, where you need to be in order to keep growing and thriving. Because it's not about surviving. We can all survive and we've been surviving, but now it's about the steps to take to thrive and really come home to ourselves. I just did a 3-day seminar workshop symposium, whatever you want to call it. And it was about coming home to yourself. And the 12 ladies that presented, it was really great just to see different perspectives of how other people view that. Because again, I think the more people can put their experiences and their training and their wisdom out, the more people were like, oh, well, that resonates with me. That does not, like that's not serving me. That is. And so the more things that are out there, the more we have to choose from, the more, growth we can have, I feel like.
Mm-hmm.
So,
absolutely. I think it's so important to find the right person.
Yes. Oh, gosh, 100%.
Mm-hmm.
And don't be discouraged if somebody that you meet and it ends up not being the right fit. I talked to so many women back when I had little kids, and they're like, well, the pediatrician said this. And I said, well, how does that feel to you? Well, I don't really like it. Okay, well, it's not the only pediatrician in town. Like, let's look for a different pediatrician, and again, I'm only saying that from experience because, I sat in the pediatrician's office and I was like, you obviously don't know me at all. Like, that would never happen in our house. Therefore, if that's all you're suggesting, then we're got to cut ties and I got to go find somebody different that's going to be able to help my kids. So I think, again, it's just a lot of reframing and undoing some of the past scenarios that have kind of been put upon us. Because my mom, it was like we had one doctor, he was the gospel, and we did whatever he said, and again, generation changes and people grow. And so, I mean, back when you and I grew up, there was nobody did what you do, right? Not really. I mean, it was very far and few between. It wasn't a mainstream type of thing. So I'm excited. It excites me to see all these beautiful people pouring into the world, based off of their experiences, but also taking their experience and growing, and learning. And then how do you teach that to somebody else? I think that's a beautiful gift. And not being afraid to pivot. You pivoted from an ICU nurse all the way on to the other side of the spectrum, And what if you went back and helped those nurses, right? To have a different way of being instead of just the doing. What could that look like in that hospital setting? So I always think big picture of what you've done and how you can always shift that for other people. So I hope all of the nurses take your program because I think it's important because that job's hard and it is energy draining and it's emotional. And there's so many aspects to it that I think on the outside that haven't had a traumatic experience of being in the hospital don't understand.
Yeah, agreed. And I think it's also important to recognize that you, as a highly sensitive person, can have those deep experiences in whatever job you do. It doesn't have to just be the serving professions. It can be in so many different ways. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And curious on this, somebody that's been highly sensitive in their younger years, because I do feel like I was very highly sensitive earlier on, and then I shifted. And I believe I shifted just due to the uncovering and the awareness and the things that I started to understand about myself and learn, and the more research I did and, understanding how my body worked and that it's not just your mind, it's also your body when you're healing from things. And anyways, I don't feel like I'm as sensitive, which I find interesting. I don't know if it's just the growth or if it's menopause, because menopause has done some insane things to me. It's like, I don't know, like, I'm not really sure, but I just was curious. Do you think that people ever, I'm not going to say recover because it's not recovery, but do they ever grow and pivot away from being more sensitive to a little less sensitive? Or is it just more wisdom based? Or what do you think?
So I actually feel like I'm more sensitive now than I've ever been because I've been able to tap into that side. Okay. And so when we talk about being highly sensitive, it doesn't mean that you just take everything personally all the time.
No, right.
Because that's the sabotaging side of it, right?
Right, correct.
But accepting and really embracing the emotions and that sensitivity, that ability to feel, is such a powerful transformation for a lot of people that had their highly sensitive natures weaponized against them when they were young. And so, like I regularly cry at beauty all the time. So like there's a tree down the way just outside of our house that in the winter there's like 300 birds that live in there, and they're just all
Oh,
chirping and like keeping each other warm. And when I'm walking my dog past it, I tear up. I just think it's so beautiful seeing a sunset, going to fireworks. When I am hearing someone on like a client call telling me about their struggles, I'll go and cry after. I just
okay.
feel like not having the emotions weaponized, but just fully embracing them is such a powerful place to be. And when we talk about how sensitivity is often seen as taking things personally, a lot of that comes from learning how to not take anything personally. That you're just very self-aware of what you struggle with, but also what you're really good at. So you don't need validation in the same way that somebody saying something negative won't necessarily drag you down.
Okay, so that's probably what I'm more so talking about. Definitely emotional when for emotional type of things, for sentimental type of things, but the other side of things I've outgrown.
Yeah, fair. And so I think that's where it's really important to define it, like not just as being highly sensitive, but also just not taking things personally is different than really
Yeah.
embracing that emotional nature.
Yeah, and I think there's two sides to it. So I think I'm glad that we had this conversation because
Me too. Yeah.
I still feel like I'm definitely more in tune with emotion things and things that make me feel, but again, I don't know if it's this midlife whatever, but I just have come to a place where I truly accept that I know who I am, and so therefore when other people don't or they say things, it just doesn't even faze me anymore. And I don't even
Yeah.
know. I mean, I guess it did faze me at one time. Just trying to think back to like any, examples, but I'm sure there were some.
Yeah. And the thing is it still happens. Like
Yeah.
if I'm in a scenario and something triggers me,
Mhm.
it's like I feel that emotional freight train like zipping away from the station. And rather than me being hanging on the outside, being like, as you're zipping down the field, I'm standing left on the station and I'm like, that was interesting. Gonna dig into that later. And you're able to stay in that more objective space. And so
Yes.
highly sensitive means we're still recognizing all those emotions. It's just that we don't get like swept away by them.
Right. The spiral doesn't happen. Oh,
Yeah, exactly.
the mindscape is what I for something different. So thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your perspective, your story, your wisdom. I love your perspective. I think, adding the energy piece to all of the things really matters again. And I don't think it's something that's talked about enough because I don't know why, because it just hasn't come to the forefront of a lot of, mainstream things. But again, the more podcasts you can go on, the more, content you put out, people will start to learn a little bit more each time. And I think that's an important gift that you have to give to women and men too, and kids and teenagers and mid-20 girls who are like looking to figure out, what's next and who they are and all of those things. I think being um, aware. I have one child who's highly sensitive, and all the stuff you're saying just resonates to the core of who she truly is. And not good, bad, or neat, it's just who she is, and we love it,
Mhm.
and we embrace it, and we're learning from each other. I think and I also, I just dropped my second one off at college, so we're empty nesters, but I as I drove home, yes, of course, I had a little bit of a tight stomach, leaving your child. It's not always the easiest thing. And seeing my other child on the way home, to set her for her senior year. And it's like when I left both of them and I started driving, I thought, okay, my role as a mom is shifting. And it's been shifting, but now it's just taking another shift. And what's my role now? Like, who am I as their mom? And what kind of just came right up naturally was just continually building a bond of communication and relationship with them where they're at. And I haven't been doing for them in a while because I knew that they needed to do for themselves so that when they got out, they would be able to do and not flop.
Mhm.
And not just do, but also the be part, like we talk a lot about just recharging your batteries and being true to you and not following the masses. And, like all of those things, nobody ever talked to me about any of that stuff, so, but my goal now as a mom is, to have those more adult conversations, but just to really support and keep building our communication and our relationship so that as they shift and I start to shift, they see me doing different things, I see them doing different things, we can come together and not necessarily become separate, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's an interesting time for sure.
Absolutely.
I'm going to look into your app though, because your app sounds right up my alley, and I definitely want to try it out and see how it is. So that way I can recommend it to other people, because I think that, again, that ripple effect of us just sharing matters.
I agree. So thank you
right.
so much for having
Yeah,
this
before we
space for people to
end,
come on.
oh, thank you. You're welcome. It was just, I woke up one day and I'm like, I'm going to do something different. I was challenged and I'm like, this feels good and I'm not going to research how to do it. My, perfectionism, I'm like, just going to do it messy and I'll figure it out as I go. And it's been the best messy thing I've ever done. So before we end, I just like to ask everybody that comes on for a few non-negotiables that you have created for yourself, that feed you well on a daily basis so that you can show up in your best version. And it might be different things. It doesn't have to just be routines or things like that.
Yeah. So one of the first things which I do when I wake up is I ask myself, where is my energy at today? What am I low in? What needs attention? And really, I then look ahead at my schedule and decide, what do I need to make sure that I can show up as my best self for the day? So that's number one, is I start off my day just asking like, oh, what are we starting with here? Where are we at? The next non-negotiable is actually something which I do at the end of the day. So often we talk about gratitude practices, writing down 3 things you're grateful for. I find that especially with highly sensitive high achievers, it doesn't really help. You just really are so focused on everything external to you already. So why do that again? So instead, I do a celebration practice. And this is what I recommend for people, is to think about one thing or a couple things that you want to celebrate about how you showed up today. Decisions that you made, things that you said, the attitude that you brought somewhere, whatever that is. Some days, if my disability is like flared up, I celebrate the fact that I put real pants on and did not stay in my PJs all day. And that's great. Sometimes we're looking for those little celebrations. Sometimes we're looking for, I actually was really good at holding space for someone today, and I asked a really good question that got them thinking. So it depends. So many different things. And then the last piece that I do that's non-negotiable is I always check in with my partner. When he gets home from work and when I'm done my workday, we always ask each other, what need of yours was not fulfilled today that you still need to try and get to this evening? And then we both chat about that and see what we can do to support one another. You could always do this by yourself as well. And just think of like, what need of mine still needs to be fulfilled today?
I love that. I'm trying that on. I love that one.
Yeah.
That's something I've not ever done, and I'm going to do it. I do want to just mention really quick about the celebration. It's often something super simple that nobody does, because we think that we should only be celebrating gigantic wins. We should only be celebrating when we get to that finish line. We should only be celebrating when we get an A. We should only be celebrating when we lose that weight or whatever. It's like, if we celebrate, just like the feeling thing, if we celebrate each day little things, and it could be that you got dressed for the day, right? It could be that you went out on a walk that you haven't done all week because X, Y, and Z has been holding you back. It is about honoring every single little thing that you've done to propel you forward, to create the wellness that you're looking for. And that's going to look different for everybody. And again, I just go back to, we're so hard on ourselves. And just, if you could just pull, zoom back a little bit and celebrate the crap out of yourself for all the things you do, because we deserve it. We deserve to feel good. We deserve to show up our best. We deserve all of the things that maybe once we thought were just supposed to be's. And I just think to do a lot of that, it is about getting into that being state. It is about getting quiet, and it is about allowing these things to come up for you. So I love your non-negotiables, and I'm totally trying that last one, and I'm going to let you know how it goes. And I encourage you guys to try it too, if it's not something that you do, because again, we always often are like, what does everybody else need? What can we do for everybody else? Make sure everybody else has got what they need. And I've never asked that question to myself. So I love it. Thank you for that wisdom.
You're welcome.
I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode as much as I have enjoyed having the conversation. And I can't wait to hear what you take away from this. So remember to, in the podcast after the episode, there's a comment space now, which is so amazing. And you can comment, we can have a discussion. You can hop on Instagram or Facebook, and all of Avery's information will be in the show notes. So don't worry about, trying to figure out where she is or how to get in touch with her. So I hope you guys have a great rest of your week, and I will talk to y'all soon. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Y'all, there were so many great takeaways from that episode. I'm going to leave you with just a few. Remember that energy management is critical for our health and well-being, not just stress management. There are 4 types of energy. We talk about physical, mental, emotional, and fulfillment. We talked about 4 types of burnout and 3 types of fear. And I'm just curious. I want to know what creates fear for you. Is it the outcome of something? Is it the process of something? Or is it possibly the loss of something? Remember that self-care practices are not just things to check off your to-do list. They are practices to put in place in order to feel a certain way, which is expansion, which is energy, which is a way to put yourself in a position to have a good day from the inside out. Number 3 or 4, understanding that we all have our own limit and boundaries that are important for us to maintain our own balance. So not looking externally, but looking internally, and what do we need to set as boundaries to protect our energy and our well-being and keep our stress intact and all of those things. We talked about self-awareness being the key in recognizing the root cause of burnout and addressing them. We are always talking about awareness. Awareness is the step to change anything in your life. Celebrating those little wins, guys. We forget to do that. A lot of times we are only looking to celebrate those grandiose things. And I want to encourage you every day to celebrate some wins. And the one thing that she said during her non-negotiables that really resonated with me was checking in with yourself and seeing which need was not fulfilled during that day. That is not a question that we often, if ever, have asked of ourselves while we were going through motherhood. And I think it's super important. And share that with a loved one. If you have a partner, a spouse, or a friend, or check in with yourself. And when that need has not been fulfilled, what are you going to do to try to fulfill that need, or ask your partner or spouse to help you fulfill that need? I think that was such an aha for me, and I'm definitely going to be trying that out, and I'll let you guys know what I think, and I would love to hear from you guys. I hope you found a 1% shift this week to move you forward on your wellness journey. Remember, small changes add up to big transformations. I want to hear what resonated with you. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave a review and rate the show. Your feedback is truly the only way that I know that you're taking away 1% shifts, adding value to your journey. It is also a way for others to find the podcast. My dream is to empower others to create health and healing. And so I would love for this show to spread wide and far. To stay connected, please check out my Instagram and Facebook pages at Live Life Balanced with Robin. Join my newsletter and grab some freebies at livelifebalancedwithrobin.com. And if you're looking to work one-on-one with a health coach, feel free to book a discovery call on my website as well. Thank you for allowing me to be part of your day. It truly means a lot that you are allowing me on your wellness journey with you. Until next time, find peace, love, and light by breathing, being present, and allowing for all possibilities to happen. Have a great day.